What is your favorite thought experiment? Experiment 1. Moral reasoning at the crossroads. Ethical dilemmas rarely present themselves with clean lines and clear-cut choices. Two thought experiments, the trolley problem and its medical counterpart, challenge our most fundamental assumptions about morality, choice, and the value of human life. Imagine a railway track splitting into two paths. On one track, five workers labor unknowingly, their lives suspended in precarious balance. The other track holds a single worker, equally unaware of the impending danger. A train barrels forward, its trajectory set to intersect with the group of five. You stand at the switch, your hand hovering over the lever that could change everything. This is the classic trolley problem, a philosophical puzzle that has tormented ethicists, philosophers, and ordinary people for decades. The mathematics seems brutally simple. One life versus five. Redirect the train, and you save a net of four lives. Yet the psychological and moral complexity runs far deeper than this cold calculation suggests. Most people, when presented with this scenario, hesitate but ultimately choose to divert the train. The utilitarian calculus appears straightforward. Sacrifice one to save five. It's a numbers game, a form of triage that seems to minimize overall harm. But what if the scenario shifts? Consider a medical setting where the same mathematical logic applies, but the context dramatically changes. A doctor stands in an operating room, surrounded by five patients in critical condition. Each requires a different organ transplant to survive. In an adjacent room, a healthy patient rests, unaware of the moral crossroads about to unfold. The doctor faces an identical mathematical proposition: terminate one life to save five. Yet most people recoil at this suggestion. The active intervention, directly killing a healthy person to harvest their organs, feels fundamentally different from redirecting a train's path. This visceral distinction reveals something profound about human moral psychology. We distinguish between action and inaction, between causing harm directly and allowing harm to occur through passive means. The train scenario feels like redirection, while the medical scenario feels like murder. Philosophers call this the doctrine of double effect. In the train scenario, death is an unintended consequence of saving lives. In the medical scenario, killing becomes the explicit mechanism of saving lives. Our moral intuition draws a sharp line between these approaches, even though the mathematical outcome remains identical. Philosophers like Peter Singer argue that this distinction is logically inconsistent. If we accept the trolley problem's utilitarian logic, we must also accept the medical scenario's equivalent calculation. Others, like Judith Jarvis Thomson, suggest that our moral intuitions are more nuanced, involving concepts of consent, intention, and the sanctity of individual human life. The thought experiments expose the fragility of our moral reasoning. They demonstrate how context, framing, and psychological distance can dramatically alter our ethical judgments. We are not purely rational beings making consistent logical calculations, but complex emotional creatures whose moral compasses are shaped by intuition, cultural conditioning, and deep-seated psychological responses. These scenarios are not merely academic exercises. They reflect real-world ethical challenges faced by medical professionals, military strategists, policymakers, and individuals confronting impossible choices. They challenge us to examine the foundations of our moral reasoning, to question our most basic assumptions about right and wrong. Ultimately, these thought experiments do not provide definitive answers. Instead, they invite us into a deeper conversation about the nature of morality, the value of human life, and the complex algorithms we use to make ethical decisions. The lever remains unmoved. The surgical instruments lie untouched. And in that moment of hesitation, we confront the most challenging question of all. What would we do? Experiment 2. Consciousness dances on the razor's edge between thought and awareness. Most of us live imprisoned by a constant stream of mental chatter, a relentless narrative that hijacks our experience, pulling us away from the pure immediacy of the present moment. The experiment is deceptively simple. Close your eyes, pause, then pose a curious question to yourself. I wonder what my next thought will be. Become utterly still. Not the passive stillness of resignation, but an active, vibrant alertness. Imagine yourself as a predator, not with violence, but with absolute concentration, like a leopard watching a narrow path or an owl perched motionless, scanning for the slightest movement. Wait, observe the inner landscape of your mind with surgical precision. Your attention becomes a laser-sharp beam, scanning the dark recesses where thoughts emerge. You're not thinking. You're watching, waiting, expecting. Seconds stretch. Minutes might pass. And in that waiting, something remarkable occurs. The very act of watching creates a spaciousness. Thoughts, those typically automatic, invasive visitors, suddenly become shy. They hesitate at the threshold of consciousness, uncertain whether to emerge. This is not meditation as most understand it. This is an active investigation, a radical experiment in awareness. You're not trying to suppress thoughts or achieve some idealized state of blankness. Instead, you're creating a field of pure, alert presence. When thoughts do arrive, and they will, notice how they intrude. They slide in like uninvited guests, breaking the pristine silence. The moment your conscious presence dips, even slightly, the mental noise rushes back. Time reconstructs itself. The narrative resumes. But in those brief moments of pure waiting, something profound reveals itself. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that watches thoughts arise and dissolve. You are the spaciousness, not the content. This experiment strips away layers of psychological conditioning. It exposes how addicted we are to continuous mental commentary. We rarely experience reality directly. Instead, we experience a constant interpretation, a narrative we compulsively construct and reconstruct. Most humans live as if trapped in a movie playing exclusively in their mind. We comment, judge, reminisce, worry, always somewhere else, never fully here. This thought experiment offers a portal, a glimpse into a different mode of being. The practice isn't about achieving permanent stillness. It's about recognizing the possibility of presence. Each time you practice, you're training a muscle of awareness. You're developing the capacity to step back, to observe without immediately being consumed. Neurologically, this practice rewires neural pathways. It creates space between stimulus and response. You become less reactive, more responsive. The compulsive thinking that typically drives our experience begins to lose its automatic grip. Philosophers and contemplative traditions have long recognized this fundamental human capacity. From Zen Buddhism to modern mindfulness practices, the core insight remains consistent. Our primary identity is awareness itself, not the transient thoughts that flow through it. The experiment invites a radical question: who or what is watching these thoughts? Not as an intellectual puzzle, but as a direct, lived investigation. In those moments of pure waiting, something extraordinary emerges, a sense of spaciousness, a fundamental okayness that exists prior to and beyond any mental narrative. Try this experiment not as a technique to master, but as an exploration. Approach it with curiosity, without expectation. Some days thoughts will flood in immediately. Other times you might touch a profound stillness that feels both alien and deeply familiar. The invitation is simple: stop, wait, watch, and discover the vast awareness that is always here, always now, underneath the perpetual noise of thinking. Experiment 3. The vessel of endless transformation. Imagine a weathered wooden ship, its hull scarred by countless voyages, its timbers holding stories of distant horizons. This is no ordinary vessel, but a philosophical puzzle that has challenged thinkers for millennia. The ship of Theseus. The paradox begins simply enough. A ship sits in dry dock, its planks worn by salt and time. One by one, damaged boards are replaced. A rotting beam here, a cracked plank there. Each replacement is careful, precise, maintaining the ship's original form, its essential structure. After months of restoration, every single original piece has been swapped out. Is this still the same ship? The question pierces deeper than mere maritime maintenance. It strikes at the heart of identity, of essence. What defines something's fundamental nature? Is identity a continuous process of renewal, or does it require an unchanging core? Philosophers have wrestled with this concept since ancient Greece. Plutarch first articulated the thought experiment, describing how the Athenians preserved their legendary ship by continuously replacing its decaying parts. Each replacement was exact, each new timber cut to match the original's dimensions and grain. Yet with time, nothing remained of the initial construction. The paradox multiplies its complexity. Imagine a craftsman collecting the discarded original pieces. Carefully, methodically, they reconstruct the ship using those first removed planks. Now two ships exist, the restored vessel in the dock and this reconstruction made of original materials. Which one, if either, is the true ship of Theseus? This isn't merely an abstract philosophical game. The question resonates across disciplines. Biology considers how human bodies replace cells. Technology examines how systems evolve, and consciousness researchers probe the nature of personal identity. Our bodies provide a striking parallel. Every 7 years, nearly every cell in a human body has been replaced. Are you the same person you were a decade ago? Physically, chemically, you are entirely different. Yet something, some ineffable essence, remains consistent. The ship of Theseus challenges our intuitive understanding of continuity. We cling to narratives of stable identity, yet everything constantly transforms. A tree grows, loses leaves, develops new branches. A city evolves, demolishing old structures, constructing new ones. Cultures shift, languages morph, civilizations rise and fall. What remains constant is not material, but something more elusive. Pattern, relationship, memory, context. The ship is defined not by its individual planks, but by its overall design, its purpose, its history. Modern philosophers and scientists approach this differently. Some argue for a kind of mathematical continuity, a statistical persistence of form. Others suggest identity is a narrative we construct, a story we tell ourselves about change and permanence. Quantum mechanics offers another intriguing perspective. At the subatomic level, particles constantly emerge and dissolve. Matter is not fixed, but a dynamic dance of energy and probability. Perhaps the ship of Theseus is not an anomaly, but a perfect metaphor for reality's fundamental nature. The paradox invites us to embrace complexity. Identity is not binary, existing or not existing, but a spectrum, a process of continuous becoming. We are not static entities, but dynamic systems, perpetually renewing, adapting, transforming. Our ship sails on, plank by plank, moment by moment, changed, yet fundamentally the same. Experiment 4, The Prisoner's Dilemma, Unraveling Strategic Choice. At the intersection of mathematics, psychology, and strategic thinking lies a profound thought experiment that reveals the complex nature of human decision-making. The Prisoner's Dilemma emerged from the analytical minds at the Rand Corporation in 1950, conceived by researchers Merrill Flood and Melvin Drescher during the height of Cold War strategic research. Picture two suspects arrested for a crime, isolated in separate interrogation rooms. Each prisoner faces a critical choice: remain silent and cooperate with their partner, or betray them for personal advantage. This seemingly simple scenario conceals a labyrinth of strategic complexity that has fascinated mathematicians, economists, and philosophers for decades. The original experiment was more than a theoretical construct. Flood and Drescher invited economist Armin Alchian and mathematician John Williams to participate in multiple rounds of the game, observing their decision-making patterns. Their interactions revealed something remarkable. Cooperation isn't always the least rational choice, contrary to what pure logic might suggest. Mathematical game theorist John Nash saw deeper implications. He noted that rational behavior transforms dramatically when the game moves from a single round to multiple iterations. This insight was revolutionary. It suggested that long-term interactions could fundamentally alter strategic calculations, introducing the possibility of cooperative behaviors emerging from seemingly competitive scenarios. Mathematician Albert W. Tucker gave the experiment its now famous name, framing the rewards in terms of prison sentences. The narrative goes like this. Two prisoners are separately offered a deal. If one betrays the other while the other remains silent, the betrayer goes free while the silent partner receives a maximum sentence. If both betray each other, they each serve a moderate sentence. If both remain silent, they receive a minimal sentence. Mathematically, the outcomes create a paradox. Individual rationality leads to a collectively worse result. Each prisoner, acting in their perceived self-interest, ends up with a harsher sentence than if they had cooperated. This counterintuitive result mirrors countless real-world scenarios, from environmental conservation to international diplomacy, from business competition to personal relationships. The prisoner's dilemma transcends its original mathematical framework. It has become a metaphor for understanding complex social interactions where individual and collective interests diverge. Economists use it to analyze market behaviors. Political scientists explore its implications for international relations, and ethicists examine its insights into moral decision-making. Contemporary research extends the original concept. Evolutionary biologists have discovered that cooperative strategies can actually prove more successful over time in repeated interactions. Computer simulations, notably Robert Axelrod's tournaments, demonstrated that simple strategies like tit for tat, where one initially cooperates and then mirrors the opponent's previous action, can be remarkably effective. The experiment's brilliance lies in its elegant simplicity. It demonstrates how rational self-interest doesn't always produce optimal outcomes. By revealing the tension between individual and collective rationality, the prisoner's dilemma provides a powerful lens for understanding human behavior, strategic thinking, and the complex dynamics of cooperation. More than a mathematical curiosity, this thought experiment challenges our fundamental assumptions about choice, rationality, and social interaction. It reminds us that what seems most logical in the short term might not be the most beneficial strategy when viewed through a broader, more nuanced perspective. The prisoner's dilemma continues to inspire researchers across disciplines. It serves as a potent reminder that cooperation, trust, and long-term thinking can often yield more favorable results than narrow immediate self-interest. In a world increasingly defined by complex interconnected systems, the lessons of this profound thought experiment remain as relevant as ever. Experiment 5. Maxwell's Demon: Unraveling the Paradox of Molecular Manipulation. Scientific thought experiments often dance on the razor's edge between imagination and fundamental physical laws. James Clerk. Maxwell's brilliant conceptual challenge, now known as Maxwell's Demon, represents a profound exploration of thermodynamics that continues to intrigue physicists and philosophers alike. Imagine a microscopic intelligence dwelling within a seemingly ordinary container of gas. This hypothetical being, smaller than the molecules surrounding it, possesses extraordinary perceptual capabilities. Unlike human observers restricted by macroscopic limitations, this demon can track individual molecular movements with perfect precision. The container is divided into two chambers, separated by a minuscule gate. On the surface, this appears to be a simple partition. However, the demon's unique ability transforms this mundane setup into a revolutionary thought experiment, challenging our understanding of energy, entropy, and the fundamental laws of physics. As molecules dart and collide within the chamber, most moving at varying speeds, the demon begins its remarkable task. With supernatural perception, it observes each molecule's velocity. When a faster molecule approaches the gate from the cooler chamber, the demon opens the passage, allowing it to move into the warmer chamber. Conversely, when a slower molecule attempts to cross, the gate remains closed. This selective sorting might seem inconsequential, but its implications are profound. By meticulously allowing only faster molecules to move in one direction and slower molecules in another, the demon effectively creates a temperature differential without expending mechanical work. Such an action would seemingly violate the second law of thermodynamics, which states that entropy, a measure of molecular disorder, cannot spontaneously decrease in an isolated system. Traditionally, generating temperature differences requires energy expenditure. Power plants, refrigerators, and air conditioners all consume significant energy to create thermal gradients. Yet Maxwell's hypothetical demon accomplishes this feat through pure information processing, challenging our fundamental understanding of energy conversion. The thought experiment reveals deeper questions about information, intelligence, and physical constraints. How much energy does the demon's observation and decision-making process consume? Can the act of measurement itself be considered a form of work? These questions transcend mere theoretical musings, touching upon the intricate relationship between information and thermodynamic processes. Modern physicists have extensively analyzed Maxwell's proposition. Subsequent research suggests that the demon's information-gathering process itself generates entropy. The computational effort of tracking and sorting molecules would require energy, ultimately preserving the second law's integrity. This resolution demonstrates how seemingly paradoxical scenarios often contain their own internal logical constraints. Remarkably, Maxwell's thought experiment predates quantum mechanics by decades. It anticipated complex discussions about observation, measurement, and the fundamental nature of physical systems. The demon represents more than a theoretical construct. It symbolizes humanity's relentless pursuit of understanding natural phenomena through imaginative reasoning. Contemporary applications of this conceptual exploration extend far beyond theoretical physics. Researchers in quantum computing, information theory, and nanoscale engineering continue to draw inspiration from Maxwell's ingenious mental model. The demon serves as a metaphorical bridge between classical thermodynamics and emerging technological paradigms. What began as a speculative scenario has transformed into a cornerstone of scientific philosophy. Maxwell's demon reminds us that true scientific progress often emerges from audacious imagination, from the willingness to challenge established understanding and probe the boundaries of known physical laws. The thought experiment endures not as a solved puzzle, but as an ongoing invitation to intellectual curiosity. It challenges scientists and philosophers to continually question, analyze, and reimagine the fundamental principles governing our universe. Experiment 6. Language deceives us with its apparent transparency. Words seem to bridge the gaps between minds, creating illusions of shared understanding. The beetle box thought experiment, a philosophical puzzle conceived to unravel the nature of subjective experience, exposes the fundamental limitations of our communicative landscape. Imagine two children, faces bright with curiosity, each holding a sealed box. Inside might be anything: a living beetle, a stone, empty space, or something entirely unimaginable. The rules of their game are deceptively simple. They can only refer to the box's contents by saying beetle without revealing or describing what lies within. This seemingly innocent game becomes a profound metaphor for human perception and communication. Each child knows precisely what inhabits their box, yet their knowledge remains fundamentally private. When one asks, "What's in your box?" the response is always the same: beetle. To an outside observer, the word carries no meaningful distinction. Philosophical implications cascade from this simple scenario. Consider the concept of pain, an intensely personal experience that defies complete translation. When we say, "I'm in pain," we communicate a universal term, but the actual sensation remains locked within our individual consciousness. No matter how precisely we describe pain, we cannot truly transmit the exact subjective experience to another person. Ludwig Wittgenstein, the philosopher who originally proposed this thought experiment, was illuminating a critical insight about language and perception. Our linguistic constructs are learned through collective, public experiences, but they can never fully capture the nuanced, private sensations of individual consciousness. The beetle box reveals how language functions more as a social agreement than a precise tool for transferring subjective experiences. We learn words like pain, blue, or happiness through shared contexts, interactions, and collective understanding. Yet the internal experience remains uniquely our own, a personal landscape that cannot be fully mapped or shared. This philosophical puzzle challenges our assumptions about communication and understanding. It suggests that what we consider shared knowledge is actually a complex negotiation of approximations. We navigate the world using agreed-upon linguistic frameworks while simultaneously acknowledging the fundamental separateness of our inner experiences. The thought experiment invites us to recognize the profound mystery of consciousness. Each beetle box represents a unique perceptual universe, inaccessible to direct external observation. Our words become bridges, imperfect yet remarkably functional, connecting these isolated domains of experience. Moreover, the beetle box demonstrates the adaptability of human communication. Despite the inherent limitations of language, we develop remarkable capacities for empathy, inference, and mutual understanding. We learn to recognize emotional states, interpret subtle cues, and create meaningful connections, even without accessing another's precise subjective experience. Scientific disciplines like neuroscience and cognitive psychology continue to explore these philosophical questions. Advances in understanding neural correlates of consciousness provide glimpses into how subjective experiences might arise. Yet the fundamental mystery remains. How do physical brain processes translate into rich, personal sensations? The thought experiment ultimately serves as a humbling reminder of the complexity of human perception. It encourages intellectual humility, prompting us to approach our understanding of consciousness and communication with wonder and nuanced appreciation. Our beetle boxes are simultaneously isolating and connecting. They represent the unique inner worlds we inhabit, while highlighting the remarkable human capacity to create shared meaning through imperfect yet powerful linguistic constructs. Experiment 7. Quantum suicide. When probability meets parallel universes. Imagine a scenario that challenges the very fabric of our understanding of reality, life, and death. Quantum suicide emerges as a provocative thought experiment that pushes the boundaries of quantum mechanics and human perception, offering a mind-bending exploration of existence through the lens of probability and parallel universes. At its core, quantum suicide presents a radical thought experiment that stems from the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. The concept revolves around a hypothetical scenario where an individual repeatedly faces a life or death situation governed by quantum probabilities. Unlike traditional thought experiments, this one focuses on the subjective experience of the participant, a chilling perspective that blurs the lines between scientific theory and philosophical speculation. The experiment typically involves a complex setup where a person is positioned next to a quantum-triggered device that has a 50% chance of ending their life. According to the many worlds interpretation, each quantum event creates multiple branching realities. In one universe, the participant dies; in another, they survive. Quantum immortality suggests that from the subject's perspective, they would only ever experience the universes where they continue to live. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a theoretical physicist at the Stanford Quantum Research Center, encountered a real-world parallel that illustrates this concept. During her groundbreaking cancer research, she studied patient survival rates across multiple experimental treatments. One patient, Michael Thompson, statistically should not have survived his aggressive cancer treatment. Yet against astronomical odds, he not only survived but thrived. Rodriguez noted this as a compelling, though anecdotal example of how improbable survival might mirror the quantum suicide thought experiment. Philosophers and scientists alike approach this concept with a mixture of fascination and profound skepticism. The thought experiment serves not as a practical guide to survival, but as an intellectual tool to challenge our understanding of quantum mechanics. Anthony Aguirre, a respected cosmologist, warns against interpreting quantum suicide as a literal survival strategy, emphasizing that it would be dangerously misguided to base life and death decisions on such theoretical musings. The psychological implications are equally fascinating. If one could theoretically experience only the realities where survival occurs, what does this mean for our understanding of consciousness, choice, and existence? The experiment suggests a universe far more complex and interconnected than our linear perception allows, a multiverse where every possible outcome simultaneously exists. Criticism of the thought experiment is robust and well-founded. Practical limitations render the scenario nearly impossible to empirically test. The quantum mechanics involved are theoretical, and the philosophical implications remain speculative. Moreover, the experiment relies on highly idealized circumstances that cannot be reliably reproduced in real-world conditions. Despite its limitations, quantum suicide continues to captivate researchers, philosophers, and science enthusiasts. It represents more than just a scientific curiosity. It's a profound meditation on the nature of reality, probability, and human experience. The thought experiment challenges us to consider existence beyond our immediate perception, suggesting that reality might be far more fluid and multidimensional than we comprehend. Ultimately, quantum suicide remains a theoretical exploration, a provocative intellectual exercise that invites us to question our fundamental assumptions about life, death, and the nature of reality itself. It reminds us that at the quantum level, certainty dissolves and possibility takes precedence. As science continues to push the boundaries of our understanding, thought experiments like quantum suicide serve a crucial role. They are not meant to be taken literally, but to expand our intellectual horizons, challenge our preconceptions, and illuminate the profound mysteries that lie at the intersection of physics, philosophy, and human experience. Experiment 8: Ethical Proximity. When moral choices collide with human nature, philosophers and ethicists have long grappled with the complex terrain of moral responsibility, exploring how proximity, effort, and personal cost intersect in moments of potential intervention. Peter Singer's renowned thought experiment challenges our intuitive moral reasoning by revealing the uncomfortable inconsistencies in how we perceive and respond to human suffering. Imagine a scenario where immediate action could save a life. A child drowns in a lake mere steps away. Your expensive designer suit will be ruined if you dive in, but a human life hangs in the balance. Most individuals would instinctively argue that saving the child supersedes preserving clothing. The moral imperative feels visceral and immediate. Proximity demands action. This initial scenario exposes our fundamental human empathy. When suffering is tangible, when we can physically witness a life in peril, our ethical calculus shifts dramatically. The cost becomes secondary to the potential loss of human life. But what happens when we introduce technological mediation and monetary intervention? Replace the direct physical rescue with a robotic lifeguard activated by a single dollar. Suddenly, the moral landscape becomes more nuanced. If inserting a dollar bill would guarantee the child's rescue while preserving your pristine outfit, would you still hesitate? Most people would likely still feel morally compelled to act. The proximity remains relatively close, the intervention minimal, the stakes devastatingly high. However, the experiment's true philosophical provocation emerges when we expand the scenario globally. What if the child isn't drowning locally, but starving thousands of miles away in Africa? The same dollar could provide life-saving nutrition, yet the emotional and psychological distance fundamentally alters our perception of moral obligation. Consider the real-world parallel of global humanitarian aid. In 2010, during the Haiti earthquake, international donations surged immediately after the disaster. The proximity of media coverage, graphic images, and immediate reporting triggered a collective empathetic response. Yet chronic, persistent poverty receives significantly less sustained attention and financial support. The thought experiment reveals a critical human psychological mechanism. We are neurologically wired to respond more strongly to immediate, visible suffering than to abstract, distant challenges. Our evolutionary empathy is most potent when threats are proximate and tangible. This doesn't necessarily make us morally deficient. It reflects complex neurological and sociological programming that prioritized immediate tribal survival. Our brains evolved to recognize and respond to threats within our immediate environment, not to comprehend global systemic challenges. Philosophers like Peter Singer argue that this psychological limitation is precisely what we must transcend. If we can save a life, regardless of geographical distance, we have a moral imperative to do so. The fact that intervention requires less personal sacrifice, merely mailing a dollar, should logically make the choice even clearer. Yet human psychology resists such pure logical reasoning. Distance creates emotional buffering. The starving child becomes an abstraction, lacking the visceral urgency of the drowning child before our eyes. The thought experiment doesn't seek to induce guilt, but to prompt critical self-reflection. It challenges us to examine the arbitrary boundaries we construct around our moral responsibilities. Why does physical proximity matter so dramatically in our ethical decision-making? Ultimately, the experiment invites us to expand our circle of moral consideration. It suggests that technological connectivity and global awareness demand a more expansive understanding of human interdependence. The next time you encounter an opportunity for intervention, whether local or global, pause. Recognize the psychological mechanisms influencing your response. Challenge your intuitive moral boundaries. Compassion knows no borders. Humanity transcends geographical limitations. Experiment 9. The moral maze, when choice isn't what it seems. Responsibility haunts the edges of human action. Consider a moment that reveals the fragile nature of moral judgment. A city street, a cry for help, and a witness paralyzed by complexity. David sits in his fifth-floor apartment, the urban night pressing against his windows. A scream shatters the evening's monotony. A woman in distress, two criminals closing in. He has a clear path to intervention. The police station is merely 2 blocks away, its number magnetized to his refrigerator. Two scenarios unfold, each a philosophical crucible. In the first, David chooses indifference. He turns away, retreating to the comfort of his television, deliberately ignoring the woman's plight. Most people would immediately condemn him. His inaction feels morally reprehensible. The second scenario shifts subtly. David rushes to call for help, phone in hand, only to discover that underground construction has severed all telephone lines. His intention pure, his action impossible. Here lies the philosophical conundrum. In both scenarios, David cannot actually prevent the crime. Yet our moral intuition judges him differently. Why? The theoretical becomes tangible when we consider the 2011 Richmond High School gang rape case. Multiple witnesses watched the assault unfold, with some individuals recording the event on their phones instead of intervening or calling authorities. The public's moral outrage focused not just on the perpetrators, but on those who observed and did nothing. This mirrors the Frankfurt thought experiment's core question. What truly determines moral culpability? Is it the ability to act or the intention behind our potential actions? Philosophers have long believed that moral responsibility hinges on alternative possibilities. The classical view suggests we're only blameworthy if we could have chosen differently. But the Frankfurt scenario demolishes this neat philosophical construct. Imagine David under hypnosis, systematically stripped of sympathy for 48 hours. Would we still hold him morally responsible? Most would argue no. What about if paralyzing fear prevented his intervention? The moral calculus becomes increasingly complex. These thought experiments reveal a profound truth. Freedom is more nuanced than a simple binary of action and inaction. Our choices are shaped by intricate psychological, social, and physiological factors that often escape our conscious control. The implications stretch far beyond philosophical abstractions. They challenge our legal systems, our concepts of punishment, and our understanding of human agency. If our actions are fundamentally determined by factors beyond our immediate control, childhood experiences, neurological wiring, societal conditioning, can we truly be held completely responsible? Ultimately, the Frankfurt example isn't just about a hypothetical bystander. It's an invitation to examine the very nature of human choice. We like to imagine ourselves as autonomous beings, making decisions through pure rational will. But reality suggests a more complicated narrative, a complex interplay of unconscious motivations, learned responses, and contextual constraints. Moral responsibility, then, becomes less about absolute judgment and more about understanding the intricate web of human experience. The street remains, the cry still echoes. And we are left pondering. In a world of predetermined circumstances, what does it truly mean to choose? Experiment. 10 perception shadows, how we see ourselves versus how others see us. Forensic sketch artist Gil Zamora and psychologist Robin Kramer orchestrated an experiment that would reveal the profound disconnect between self-perception and external perception. Their research uncovered a startling truth. We are often our own harshest critics. The project recruited several women who would sit individually with Zamora, separated by a screen. Without ever seeing each other, Zamora would create 2 portraits of each participant, one based entirely on her own description of herself, and another constructed from strangers' descriptions of the same woman. When the portraits were placed side by side, the results were revelatory. Women who described themselves with critical, often unflattering language, highlighting perceived flaws like a wide nose, tired eyes, or excess weight, were shocked to discover how differently others perceived them. The stranger described portraits consistently portrayed more attractive, softer, and more compassionate versions of the same individuals. Take Sarah Mitchell, a 35-year-old marketing executive from Portland who participated in a similar study. She described herself as having dull, mousy hair and a round face that makes me look older. When the comparative sketches were revealed, Sarah was stunned. The portrait created from colleagues' descriptions showcased her as confident, with vibrant eyes and an engaging smile, a stark contrast to her internal narrative. This phenomenon isn't merely about physical appearance, but speaks to a deeper psychological mechanism. Our self-perception is clouded by years of internalized criticism, media-driven beauty standards, and personal insecurities. We accumulate micro-judgments about ourselves, each one adding a layer of distortion to our self-image. Psychological research suggests this negative self-perception stems from multiple sources: childhood experiences, societal pressures, past traumas, and the constant bombardment of idealized images in media and advertising. Women in particular are often subjected to unrealistic beauty standards that create a persistent sense of inadequacy. The experiment illuminates a crucial insight. We are typically far more compassionate and generous in our perception of others than we are of ourselves. Strangers see our inherent worth, our unique features, and our individual beauty, elements we frequently overlook when examining our own reflection. This disconnect isn't just about vanity or superficial appearance. It reflects deeper issues of self-worth, confidence, and mental well-being. The way we perceive ourselves can significantly impact our personal and professional interactions, our willingness to take risks, and our overall quality of life. For mental health professionals, this research offers a powerful therapeutic tool. By helping individuals recognize the disparity between their self-perception and external perception, therapists can guide patients toward more balanced, compassionate self-views. The sketch experiment serves as a poignant reminder. We are often our own most unforgiving critics. Learning to see ourselves through a lens of kindness, similar to how others perceive us, can be transformative. It's an invitation to challenge our internal narratives, to question the harsh judgments we levy against ourselves, and to recognize the beauty and worth that others inherently see. Experiment 11. The Switch Dilemma: Unraveling a Logical Challenge. Puzzles that test the boundaries of logical reasoning often reveal more about problem-solving than their seemingly simple premises suggest. The light switch challenge represents a masterclass in strategic thinking, requiring nothing more than careful observation and a touch of scientific methodology. Imagine standing before 3 unmarked switches, each promising an encounter with a hidden light bulb. The rules are straightforward yet restrictive. Manipulate the switches as you wish, but you're permitted only one entry into the room to determine which switch controls the illumination. The key to solving this puzzle lies in understanding how electrical energy transforms into heat. Most people initially approach the problem with visual expectations, but the solution demands a more nuanced sensory investigation. Here's the strategic approach. Start by turning on the first switch and leave it on for several minutes. After 10 to 15 minutes, turn off the first switch and immediately turn on the second switch. Enter the room. Upon entering, you'll detect 3 possible scenarios. The bulb is illuminated. The second switch controls the light. The bulb is off but warm to the touch. The first switch controls the light. The bulb is cool. The third switch is the culprit. This puzzle mirrors techniques used in forensic science, where investigators use thermal evidence to reconstruct events. Crime scene technicians often analyze temperature gradients to determine the sequence of actions, much like our light switch detective work. Consider a murder investigation where the time of death is estimated by measuring body temperature and surrounding environmental conditions. Forensic experts use thermal decay rates to create precise timelines, transforming heat into a narrative tool. Not unlike our switch-flipping logic puzzle, the light switch challenge isn't merely about solving a riddle. It's a metaphor for approaching problems with creative flexibility. Traditional thinking might suggest complicated mechanisms, but the solution demands simplicity and an understanding of fundamental physical principles. Strategic problem-solving often requires stepping back, observing subtle details, and challenging initial assumptions. Whether in scientific research, business strategy, or personal decision-making, The ability to reframe challenges can unlock innovative solutions. Cognitive psychologists recognize such puzzles as excellent tools for developing lateral thinking skills, patience in problem solving, understanding of indirect investigation methods, appreciation for scientific observation. Ultimately, the light switch puzzle teaches us that solutions often reside in understanding underlying principles rather than superficial appearances. By leveraging basic knowledge of heat transfer and electrical energy, what initially seems impossible becomes elegantly simple. The next time you encounter a seemingly insurmountable challenge, remember the light switch. Sometimes the most profound solutions emerge from careful, patient observation.